All right, we are now recording. We could go with status updates. I can go first since I'm speaking. There were a couple minor issues that came about the pack release earlier this week. The one that I was looking at right before this meeting is for updating the docs. When we create a release for pack, we ultimately update the docs on our website for all the commands and stuff like that. So Sam noticed that they weren't getting updated, so I looked into that. I did find what the issue was and just put a PR up, basically because we were using it as a library or pack as a library. We were pinned to a very specific version, which was like 0.13.0. So we need to upgrade that every time that we generate the docs. So I just added that to the makefile to, and it should work, right? So yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that. Any other status updates for the, oh, actually, I have one more, sorry. Tecton, we were finally able to get the Tecton stuff, the 2 tasks upgraded into the Tecton catalog. We are still waiting on the pipeline. There's some minor tweaks necessary there, but hopefully we'll be able to get that out soon as well. All right, now I'm officially done. Anybody else have any status updates?
I suppose I guess I've kind of been trying to push this asset cache thing along, inevitably get it to the end of the road so it's functional and you have something minimal and usable. Yeah, and I guess other than that, just the pack release and trying to hack around some of the issues with how Ubuntu builds packages, which is like really a nightmare. Yeah.
Yep, I could attest to that. I think a lot of Linux-based package managers are quite painful to deal with.
Um,
Cool. All right. So let's see if there's nothing else. We'll move on to release planning. Um, I don't think we have anything scheduled right now, other than the stuff that we're working through, both on the pack side to address the Ubuntu issue, and then on Tecton to try to get that pipeline across the finish line. Cool. We can move on to the next item. I put on here cache flags, since this is top of mind right now. And I wanted to see whether or not we wanted to kind of think this through a little bit as part of this meeting. I know, Dan, you were kind of, spearheading this for a bit. And I think I just came across another use case for it in talking with somebody about how to use pack within Bitbucket. The Bitbucket pipelines, I believe is the correct term there. So for some context, here I have the screenshot there. Might be a little tiny. But so Bitbucket pipelines have this kind of requirement, or yeah, I guess a limitation in which they don't support named volumes at all, right? Like that is like one of the big limitations. Then the secondary one is that the bind mounts, the only volumes that you're allowed to use are bind mounts, and they have to be to the path of the what's called the Bitbucket clone directory, right? So basically where you threw all your source into it. And it's a pretty harsh limitation, but to some extent it makes sense. I wish they did support named volumes, because then we wouldn't have this issue. But nonetheless, I think it does bring up the kind of question around whether or not we want to enable support for bind mounts for caching, right? So if you think about it, the lifecycle essentially provides this limit or provides this functionality, right? Their options for caching is cache dir and cache image. And cache dir is literally just a file system directory. right? And pack is the one that ultimately is creating the volume, right? The named volume, and then using that as the cache directory when passing it into the lifecycle. So if you think about it, right, there's nothing stopping pack from actually providing a bind mount to the lifecycle as a directory. And so essentially saying on the host, this is the directory where I want to like cache my stuff, right? And we're talking about build cache in this case. Um, so yeah, so I think I put on here one of the kind of like, in my mind, the expectation would be that we'd have something like a build cache, and then you'd be able to point to a local directory, or you could name it, have a named volume. The complexity then comes with like, how do we determine um, whether we're talking about a named volume or a directory, right? A local directory. And I think that's where, Dan, your proposal comes to mind, because it allows us to expand on these, like, I don't want to say infinite, but almost infinite options, right? That we could provide. The other thing is, I believe this is the first and only time that we'll be kind of expanding from this terminology of cache and I guess externalizing the idea of a launch cache, right? And the launch cache is only used with the Docker daemon use case. It's not used on the publish, because in that case we use the image uh, from the registry. So I guess any questions on that? I know I've talked a little bit on that.
Yeah. So I guess like, I don't know if I have a question, because I think this all makes sense, but it's like kind of the philosophy around like what we're doing here, where it's we are adding features like one by one, and now we are hitting this point where it's like, okay, there's like a lot of asks in around this area for flexibility. I don't know if what I proposed is like the most reasonable or even the best or even like a good UI. Probably not. But there is like a part of this conversation where it's like we want to have a interface that we can add to. Maybe we don't have all of the functionality right out of the gate. Like, but yeah, I guess,
Yeah.
which is kind of like where I think this like got stopped last time, right? Which is like, because our like if I provide a CLI interface that implies you can do something, do I also am I required to also provide all of the implementation of that, right? So
Yeah. I think where I'm at right now, personally, is, again, I definitely feel the pressure of the reoccurring theme, right? Especially when, the simple ask was like, hey, I just want to be able to name this volume however I want, so I could then look it up, right? Or reuse it for whatever purposes. And again, there were some opinions early on whether or not that was the appropriate thing to do, but given the fact that we now support cache image, like, it makes no sense to not provide that functionality. And now to further expand it to this, right? Like, again, Bitbucket is just one use case, right? But like, if I wanted to literally just provide a directory locally to, my workspace, I want to be able to do that as well, right? Like, there's nothing stopping us, um, or nothing should be stopping us there. So let me see. Sorry, going back to this, the proposal that you have, right? I think we talked about the complexity. Wait, that's not the proposal. Where is it? Oh, this is the proposal, right? So it talks about cache. Then it has a couple of like options. I think the one thing that I'm still worried about is the relocation functionality, right?
yeah.
Like being able to take from some place and then put it in another place in one parameter. I think that's a little bit maybe too complex, and I don't think we've seen yet a use case for that to come up. So my proposal would be that, like, based on, now launch, we want to maybe specify the type of cache somewhere on here, and then the type of mount, right? Or type of volume, whether it's a bind mount or a named volume.
Yeah.
That would be the two options there.
I mean, I guess like my question is kind of like, hey, we're now at a point like we've had some asks in this for these like particular sets of features. We're at a point now where we're gonna like come up with a new way that people can figure out what volumes they're using, where they come from, etc. How general do we want to make it? Do we want to make it just big enough to encapsulate all the asks that people have made right now? Or like, do we want to make this a little bit larger so that upon a like if in the future someone asks for this, oh, I want to do this new thing with volumes that we just, it doesn't fit into our like UI very well. And we have to do this again, where we redefine exactly how the flags work. I guess that's kind of like what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah,
And maybe that's not needed right now, but
I definitely think we want to strike a balance, right? Um, I don't think we could really say that we can go one way or the other, because one way hypothetically would be providing a flag for each type, right? Similar to what I kind of, grossly just threw out here, right? Like build cache, launch cache, and then like you would specify like if we really wanted to expand that, it's like build named volume cache or something, right? And the other one would be a directory. So like we could tell the difference, right? So like that in itself seems like it's already breaking down, right? Then if we look at this options for like similar to the Docker mount stuff, I don't think it's too bad, right? Like I do think that it's reasonable, especially if you're thinking about like just how I think it's like a Linux thing, right? Like mounting uh, disk options essentially, right? And being able to provide like this is the general type, right? Like let's say again, volume. Uh, so I have three in mind, right? It's like directory or bind mount, right? Like however you want to spell it out. Then there's a volume, which we'll associate with a named volume. And then there's an image, right? So those are the three types of caches that could be. Um, or mechanisms. Again, loose on the terminology, but those are those three things. Then we have to differentiate between this is a build cache or a launch cache, right? For the image, like I believe we used the same thing for both, right? Build and launch caches. For the other two, we'd have to like be able to separate both of them. So that gets a little bit complicated. And then lastly would be additional options per the types, right? So for like an image type, you'd have to give it a URL. For the named volume, you just have to specify a name. For the directory or bind mount, you'd have to specify a local path, right? So again, I think those options right there, I think that's where we could really expand on it, right? But you see how like hopefully it's simple enough where we could at the top level, like these are the types, and then somewhere we document based on this type, these are the options that you have available for it.
yeah. Yeah, okay.
Does that all make sense?
Yeah. Good.
Again, it's all in my mind, nothing on paper just yet, but I think we could collaborate on it. Cool. Anything else on that topic? Any questions, comments, concerns? So the action item from here would be, I guess I could write down like what I just mentioned. But I think Dan, I don't know if you want to like drive this all the way to the RFC.
Yeah. Happy to.
Awesome. Cool. All right, moving on to the next topic, pack refactor RFC question mark.
Yeah. So I think I just put this up here trying to get some feedback. on it / acceptance. Specifically, whoops. Let me share my screen here. Cool. So I'm not gonna go all the way through this again. I think Joe just left me a little bit of feedback. Um, okay. But I guess the big thing that I'm looking for is like some maintainer consensus around these changes before like moving on, because I feel like that's the first level of concern, right? Like that's all I'm looking for.
Cool. Could you maybe like I guess the questions I have is were any of Joe's comments things that require a little bit deeper thought, or were they just very like high level?
I think it's like, do you have any alternatives? Changing a header. Are there any examples? Yes, there's a bunch of them. GGCR is a simple one.
Okay. So I think what he's asking for is along the lines from the RFC template, right? Like he wants some prior art for references of where this has worked really well. Um, did we already specify GGCR in this RFC, or was it?
No.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then alternatives, that's probably something worth thinking about. I don't know that they're like the alternatives that I always like to put is like do nothing and just live with pain forever. Uh, so I don't know if you want to throw that on there, but you could also, I'm sure, come up with something slightly different. Um, cool. I'll definitely take a look at it. Have there been any major changes since the last time I looked?
Nope.
Nope. Okay.
No.
Yeah, I'll definitely throw my stuff on there.
I guess I don't really know when the last time you looked was, but probably not. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think it was after we broke it up into like almost like phases, right? Cool.
Oh, okay.
All right. Yeah, again, this is probably one of the first RFCs for the platform specific only. So we'll iron out some wrinkles there. Hopefully it'll
Yeah.
be smoother.
Yeah, I guess the next question on this is just like, I could present this in the RFC group today, but then it immediately goes out of, right? It's just like immediately jumps that like point where the maintainers have like control or say over what's happening exclusively, which seems
Hmm.
like it's kind of what we want to do. And so it feels a little awkward being like, okay, well, whatever. I'll just like slam this through and not use the new process that we want at all.
Yeah, I totally agree. If you may, could you ping David? I don't think I saw his review on there, but just ping him uh, to kind of get a review, because I think if we get myself and David, that should be sufficient to then go to the working group and say like this was looked at by the platform maintainers. You guys should just take it, right? Or at least a little bit more on that side.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll do. I've added him in the in the RFC, but I'll like Slack him. So,
Yeah, poke
so
him.
sounds
Just
good.
put a poking gif on there. Yeah,
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
cool. Anything else? All right. It seems like we could end this meeting early if there's nothing else. Cool. All right. See y'all. Thank you for coming.